I think we can get started. So good morning and welcome Spark family, partners. I know some of you are new to our Spark team. Spark is the Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge. We're an initiative that invests and amplifies local efforts underway in 6 regions to ensure that new investments are equitable, reduce racial disparities, build a culture of health, as well as prepare for a changing climate. Our initiative's long-term goal is to really change the way that metropolitan cities grow, invest, and build through integrated cross-sector approaches that benefit low-income communities and communities of color. So we work with amazing local partners doing the on-the-ground work in 6 cities and regions, some of whom are here today. We have Transformation Alliance in Atlanta, Mile High Connects in Denver. We have Elevated Chicago in Chicago, North Memphis Voice Coalition. We have Bay Area for All in our San Francisco Bay Area, as well as our Spark LA team, which Natalie also will be representing from. So our national partners are the NRDC, or Natural Resource Defense Council, and I see a lot of our folks here today. We also have our Low Income Investment Fund, Enterprise Community Partners, and I also think that we have a pretty diverse group of local partners and funders in the room, so it's going to be a great conversation. So a little bit about me. I'm Ella. I'm our Spark Community of Practice lead, and the Spark Community of Practice really brings together partners in shared learning across national, regional lines to bring together peer learning, shared learning, and uplift local models and really shift the field together. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marissa and we can all get started.
Hi, good morning. I'm Marissa with NRDC and the Spark National team. I am loving these answers. I see that we will need living infrastructure, liberation and justice, community ownership, self-determination to build a just and equitable green economy. You can keep adding those in the chat. I love seeing those. I am really excited to have you all here today for this discussion on transitioning to a just and equitable green economy. You know, when we conceived of this session last winter, we thought that we were going to be together in place in New Orleans and in an amazing and remarkable place to share and learn from peers working on addressing climate impacts and innovating on community-driven solutions. And here we are. So in spite of all of the changes and the challenges in the world today, I'm really grateful to be here with you, though I hope that we can hold a little bit of that initial concept that we were going to be together on the ground. And as we've had to shift, our lives have changed and we're finding ourselves, you know, in this moment of converging crises of health and racial uprising, stark inequity, and really wanting to still uplift these solutions and innovations for advancing a green economy. And really, our goal is not to, I think, return to the old normal. We want to create a new normal together that is not based on the history of consumption and racist systems, but is really a new vision for an equitable and sustainable economy. And maybe we can put a link to this in the chat, but Spark has laid out some principles for a just and equitable recovery. And so now we can start to build on some of these principles. So we're excited to have you here today to build national and local coordination, and we need your voice for this vision. So our objective today is to continue to explore some of these intersections around race, climate, and economy in this moment, but also for building a just and equitable future, to share knowledge and insight with each other on current barriers, but current creative projects that we're working on, and to continue to identify opportunities for collaboration on our shared priorities, challenges, or questions that we have and ways to advance innovative solutions. So we have some really great speakers that I'm really excited about. My colleague Khalil Shahyd with NRDC. He is someone that always opens our minds to think and build connections in a new way. Dr. Erica Holloman Hill with West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, a scientist but always grounded in sort of the sacredness of natural spaces and communities, and Natalie Zappella from Enterprise Community Partners. And you know, you always inspire me to think big and then figure out how to implement those ideas. So after we hear from our speakers, we'll get to spend some time in breakouts. We'll have 3 breakout topics on, I think they're on the next slide. Federal policy and the impact on local communities, advancing green and equitable workforce and jobs, and integrated infrastructure and ensuring communities are climate resilient without displacement. There'll actually be 4 breakout rooms, and my colleague from NRDC, Michelle Hassan, will facilitate the 4th breakout. So thank you so much for being here. And we designed the time to share our knowledge, pose some questions, and come together on some collaboration. So with that, I will kick it over to you, Khalil.
Khalil, you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marissa. Good morning or afternoon if you're on the East Coast. So I'm gonna share my screen shortly, but I'm just gonna give an overview, and hopefully I don't extend over the time, but Marissa, do monitor me and ping me if I need to shorten. But I'm just gonna give an overview, you know, of this present moment, you know, what's happening, and, you know, a little bit of intro into discussion of why, and try to kind of connect it to the local level actions and some of what, you know, we should be or could be moving towards advocating for, you know, going forward to answer for this moment. So I'm gonna start sharing now. All right, do you all see that?
Yep, not yet full screen, but we can see all the slides. So thank you, Khalil.
Got it. Okay, got it. All right, so responding to COVID, lessons for the green economy. And I was really, and I hope that at some point we can have some more conversation about this, but I was really curious about the use of this term green economy, because it's not something that we normally discuss or talk about, you know, particularly in the environmental movement. And I think it really sort of sets a tone and a policy space that's very different if we were, you know, speaking just about climate change. I think the transition to the green economy is a much broader, a much more robust and fuller topic than, quote unquote, you know, just thinking about this in the context of climate change, even as climate change, you know, still, you know, motivates and inspires a lot of what we are trying to do. But when we limit the conversation and the policy space to climate change, I think it changes some of what we do. So I was really happy with the use of this term specifically, as opposed to climate change. And so, you know, yeah, this first part is going to be kind of depressing, but, you know, you all know the story. You're living it. We're all in it together. But I think most importantly, the coronavirus disruption and a lot of the debates and the fights that we're having nationally in terms of federal policy are really, you know, a warning of things to come, you know, but also, you know, you see the political lines that are drawn, which are, you know, the the lines that you would expect and have seen around these issues, for the last decade or more. So much of it shouldn't be surprising, but I think, in terms of the disruption to people's livelihoods, to people's, just everyday lives, I think it is something that we have not really discussed, for obvious reasons in the environmental movement. But I think this moment is making it clear that we definitely need to put a great deal more attention to it. And in a lot of what we saw, or a lot of what I've seen so far when looking at, articles and things, trying to make the connection between the COVID-19 and climate change, a lot of it focuses on the emissions. But here we're going to really talk about, what the impact on people is, and how policy responds to supporting people, through these difficult times, maintaining stability in communities. And I think that's the lesson that, we need to be taking and looking forward to as we begin to address climate change and make a full transition to a green economy. COVID isn't racist, but it's certainly taken advantage of a very racist society with a racist structural and institutional history. Such that, as you guys are all aware, the burdens of this disease are falling most heavily on communities of color, African American, Black, more broadly, and Latinos, Latinx communities across this country. And the disparities, initially, we had anecdotal data, but are now beginning to get more data. Very early on, there was a push to make both to collect disaggregated data and to make this data more publicly available, because people were seeing it, people were experiencing it, but we didn't have the actual data to really show it. And again, the racial disparities, are just, really across the board, both in incidence rates, but also in death rates. And you're going to see it also in the aftermath effects of what this is. And, there are many factors, in our sort of current or, current context, that are causing these disproportionate burdens. But again, it just really goes back to the institutional and systemic history of this country, and not being able to really address those issues. But more in the policy sense, in our current context, living conditions, work circumstances, underlying health conditions, and lack of access to care, that are again rooted in these historical and systemic injustices and inequalities that continue to plague the society at large. And again, you're going to see, service workers and small business owners are being hardest hit, and will continue to be hardest hit. They are also in, many of the federal policy discussions, while we're, bailing out airlines, bailing out banks, bailing out hotels. If you're a renter, if you're a small business owner, if you are a house cleaner, that the level of care and the level of priority that you've been able to receive through our federal response, just has not really met the scale or the magnitude of the impact of this pandemic. Again, both in the direct impact of incidence and death, but also in the broader economic and social ramifications of what's happening to people, families, communities, and cities across the country. And I want to go back to, and I'll go back to at some point, this one in the middle here, American cities brace for a future with even greater inequality, but the subheading there that we have in there was cities will cut services and prioritize high earners. I mean, one, that shouldn't be surprising, because that's happening in every city, across the country, across the planet, already. We call it gentrification. And so every city is pursuing, that strategy where, where they can through land use, which is, the primary mechanism, that cities control. And also it's one of the key ways that cities finance themselves, are going to prioritize both higher earners, but also those that imply higher valued land and property for the city. So that shouldn't be surprising, but what's happening now under COVID is really an acceleration or potential acceleration and a deepening of that process across cities. And again, not every city is going to be able to do that, because cities are going to be competing for those high earners. Not every city is Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, where you have a steady influx of high income earners. You have a stable, in terms of DC, a stable, federal economy that props up your local economy, that provides higher earnings and incomes for folks who are able to qualify and get into those positions. And so, for those cities that aren't able to attract these high earners, there's going to be, persistent, poverty and inequality, and just, struggling to, maintain services and maintain quality of life across those cities. And so, and when we think about a green economy, we have to have an answer for those cities and those communities, not just for these hot market, high growth areas. And I'll get into a little bit of that later. So again, as I sort of hinted at, the ramifications, of the pandemic, just threaten, further entrenchment and escalation of inequalities, but most importantly, shifting the behaviors that have been necessary both to help us to manage this the pandemic, which we haven't had, the full support for those shifts in behaviors that are necessary, which is why we're still in this space where we're seeing, wave after wave of this, continue, even as other countries are showing much more success, because we haven't really committed the resources to actually supporting people to shift those behaviors. And again, when thinking about a green economy and that transition, when thinking about, climate change and that transition, supporting people's capacity to be able to shift behaviors, to change livelihoods, to change the way that they move, to change, the way that they access food and housing, energy, et cetera. We haven't placed a lot of emphasis or attention on those issues, but as this process moves forward, I think that's where our biggest fights are going to be, particularly if we in any way want to do a green economy and a just transition with any sort with any sense of equity. Paying attention to these questions are going to be key for how we do that. But so two big issues. First, we're seeing and expecting even more to come, a wave of evictions across the country, which again, this it's larger in that it is a national issue, but then smaller in that it's going to impact some neighborhoods, some communities, some buildings more so than others. But after Hurricane Katrina, when the city was completely depopulated, there was an opportunity, a plan in place, to attempt to remake, that city, to reinvest in the built environment, in housing. Once we got all those people, quote unquote, the undesirables out of the city, it made that type of imagining of that reinvestment possible. And with this many evictions, we're thinking, some estimates now are as many as 30 to 40 million across the country. You are going to potentially see, again, that type of accelerated, sort of rapid, opportunism in the gentrification of these cities. Once you're able to move these people out, there's going to be, at some point, federal investment to stabilize the housing market, much less to stabilize, the actual renters who rely on that market. Which is, again, going to create opportunities for that type of reinvestment. And here, you can see state by state, in some states, particularly in the South, in the Southwest, you see close to or more than half of renters are at risk or potentially facing eviction due to this crisis, which the economic impact of that type of mass eviction. Even if you don't quite reach 50%, but just the economic ramifications of that, for any both housing market, but also just more broadly, just can't be understated. But these things are being allowed to happen because we have, for so long, denigrated and devalued renters, particularly renters of color, Black renters, that we discount, the impact and what impact that will have on the broader society for allowing these evictions to happen. And as the rent is due, so are utilities. As people are, struggling to pay rent, they're also struggling to pay utilities. And even before the pandemic, we know that there was an affordable housing crisis. Much the same as before the pandemic, we know that many people were suffering unusually high energy burdens due to the fact that, particularly low-income families and families of color, have been sort of redlined and crowded in residential areas where, the homes don't have the level of investment and regular maintenance. So they bleed energy and are forced to consume more energy per square foot than their middle and upper income counterparts. All the while, they're struggling to pay utility bills. As utilities are spending, in aggregate more than $15 billion across the country to provide energy efficiency retrofits. Mostly again to middle and upper income housing. And so these same families have essentially been subsidizing, the purchasing of Energy Star appliances, installation of new windows for these upper income and middle income families, and not getting the same service in return. And so seeing their energy bills continue, to increase, particularly in summer months if you're in the South, and in the winter months if you are in the North. And so while we're seeing the eviction threat, we're also seeing, the threat of people having utilities shut off, access to energy, but also water at a time when they need to be home, in the heat of the summer, but also, need access to water, to continue to clean, wash hands, and to do all the things that we need to do to help to manage.
Khalil, I just want to give you, sorry to interrupt. I think we have a quick 1 or 2 minutes left, and then we want to make sure we have time for Erica and Natalie. Thanks.
Because really, much of what we talk about is really a question about social policy. It's really a question about how we manage the relationship between the benefits and burdens of society, how we manage economic growth, how we manage, rights, roles, and responsibilities as we move forward. And just a couple more. And why this matters, because in the next couple of months, you're going to be hearing a lot about build back better, build back better. It's, it's the slogan of the Biden presidential candidacy. But you're going to hear about it, a lot through the halls of Congress. And here, these 3 examples are from Europe and a lot of international examples, which provide I would say a much more holistic context or framework around Build Back Better. Whereas when we discuss Build Back Better here in this country, it's really, again, the sort of narrow policy framework that's just focused on the economy. It's focused on creating jobs, workforce training, et cetera, and a much more broader and holistic, and particularly those issues related to the social safety net are really left out of what we're considering and what we see as important priorities if we're actually going to build back better. Which is why, many people, when we think about the green economy and the green transition, many people, are actually suggesting that maybe we should actually look to Europe, to be much more of our leaders in this space, because the policy space there has been, and the discussion about these issues have been much more broader than what we've been allowed to have here in this space. And I know I'm short for time, so I'll stop and just open for questions or transition.
Thanks, Khalil. We're going to move to Erica.
We usually stop when we think about solar, and even when we think about solar, we get stuck kind of on a rooftop solar, which enters into a host of other barriers for community members whose roofs aren't available, but also too, it limits us to thinking about workforce development and training. And so I'd like to kind of try to balance this family life that I have. Please forgive me. This is the 2-year-old. I cannot pick you up right now, son. Okay. And so I want us to start thinking outside of the box. So for example, when you are looking down major city streets, you notice on the side you have these solar panel boxes added to stop signs, roadways. Who are the individuals putting those in? Is this an opportunity for, you could definitely pick them up, for us to think outside of the box as we think about access to these opportunities? Also, thinking outside of the box, when we talk about climate change, green jobs, we think about it in the context of reducing carbon, because carbon is one of the greenhouse gases, but it's not the only one. So there are a host of other technologies and opportunities for us to think about workforce development and training outside of kind of the carbon greenhouse gas. And so I really want us to think about, again, outside of the context when we're thinking about the Green New Deal. 2 things that I'm going to leave you with, and to the next presenter. Thank you for the kind of the short time. I think it works out universally. I want you to think about this idea of climate reparations. When we think about energy and understanding that energy is the ability to do work and the extractive nature, well then the extraction of Africans off of the coast of Africa and throughout really set up the free market that allowed for us to even move to an industrialized era where now this extraction moved from the extraction of people to an extraction of natural resources beyond the people that became the coal, the fossil fuels, and the things that we are working with. So in that context, think about what is climate reparations in the context of this new climate deal or new Green Deal, and what does that mean? Because the last New Deal wasn't really a great deal for a lot of people, specifically African Americans. And so as we're thinking about even the language, the new Green Deal, what does that mean? And how do we ensure that we aren't falling into unintentional biases as we're thinking of policy solutions for new visions, for a new future that we need as we all think 7 generations forward. And so thank you all. I look forward to leading the discussion around alternative, out-of-the-box thinking around workforce development and access to this Green New Deal. Thank you, just for the sake of time. I'm coming.
Thanks so much, Erica. And now I'll turn it to you, Natalie.
Great. Thank you all for being here today, and for Khalil and Erica. You guys just gave amazing presentations, so it's hard to follow. I'm actually going to get off video because my Wi-Fi is pretty spotty right now, just so you guys have access to the slides. So I'm going to start sharing in a minute, but just want to say really glad to be here. And I'm Natalie Zappella with Enterprise, and I'm actually here representing a whole slew of coalitions and amazing critical partnerships in the LA region, including Spark LA, LA Regional Open Space and Affordable Housing Collaborative, and a lot more. So I'm with a lot of people, and Michelle Hassan, who will be doing one of the breakouts, is one of the true leaders in our region too. So with that, I will share my screen and start going. Okay, it should be going for you guys. Okay, so I just covered this. I'm going to be talking about our efforts to push the region to think more holistically, and kind of thinking about resilience and land use and people as priorities as we deal with our current crises and the homelessness and climate change. So just to give you a little sense of what's happening in LA, we have a homelessness crisis that we've had for a long time. It is a really significant issue, and it's an inhumane way of treating people, and it's a major struggle. And we can't keep up with the inflow of newly homeless people. 2/3 of people are experiencing homelessness for the first time, and you know, as you can see at the stat at the bottom, like, we just can't keep pace. Like, as many times as we can house people, double that is coming in each year. So it's a really, you know, terrible situation. And the other thing that is really critical is that it's definitely connected to structural racism, and the number of Black people that are experiencing homelessness is they're 4 times more likely. And we just can't have this happen anymore. The other kind of compounding crises that we're facing is climate change. California is literally on fire right now, and we have been having a really hard time with the coronavirus pandemic, and you know, it's really impacting people of color, especially people with high levels of poverty. They're getting infected and dying at disproportionately high rates that Khalil spoke to. And as we grapple with these preceding challenges we've had to COVID-19 and the new, even more devastating impacts that COVID-19 is happening, we are really coming together as a region to try and look at every available resource we have and build a new path forward so that we can build neighborhoods that are stable, inclusive, healthy, and resilient. And a lot of that begins with homes. So as one example of efforts that we've been building up here, a lot of this is from the work of La Rosa and some really innovative public partners and developers that are mission driven. Here's an example of one project that is combining resilient infrastructure with affordable housing development. This is a 53 one-bedroom unit apartment building that has a living lung. You can see it's right next to a freeway. So they're building in urban forest with pine trees to mitigate the air pollution. They're providing public open space because it's a park-poor neighborhood. They're building in water systems to capture and reuse water, and rooftop gardens and community and service space. So this is an example of a pilot project we've been supporting through the La Rosa Collaborative, and how we're talking about integrating infrastructure investments. And what if we had a way to expand this and scale this up in a way that we had typologies for how to integrate infrastructure investments with affordable housing and community benefits, and especially for the larger linear scale types of infrastructure investments, combining that with anti-displacement strategies. So what you're looking at here is a beginning framework for that La Rosa developed a couple of years ago and has been building out to think about how do we combine this resilient infrastructure investment with all these social benefits, and doing a national scan of different types, like land use typologies. So we have a larger framework around that if you're interested. That's one tool we've been building. Another thing that's we're a part of locally and has really taken shape significantly over the last several months, especially with COVID, but it's been building for many years, is this idea of like community controlled homes and social housing. How do we prevent this mass eviction that Khalil so eloquently shared, and the displacement, and address the homelessness and corporate ownership that we saw after the recession before? And how do we promote stability instead? So some of the things that we're doing is we're helping CDCs that are mission driven connect with community land trusts that have been growing in the region. We have 5 now. We had 2 a couple of years ago, and so there's a lot of movement in this effort of community control, and give them the first opportunity to purchase sites and build partnerships with the public sector so that they can produce and preserve affordable housing and create community controlled homes in perpetuity. And then what if public agencies actually looked at their existing resources that they have and pooled all the funds that they have for acquisition across various public agencies, so Parks and Rec, Public Works, the Housing Fund. You know, what if they started looking and pulling these funds for acquisition and also for capital improvements for the rehabilitation? So that's some of the work we started doing with the Green EFA Coalition, and connecting the money for electrification, and how do we think about that in a time of post-COVID, and intersecting these funds, commingling them in a way so that we're helping to rehab these properties in these communities that are most at risk of displacement, with anti-displacement strategies to protect them and keep them more affordable and safer for them and healthier in the long run. And then what if publicly owned land was aggregated and then entitled for affordable housing, and combined with this integrated infrastructure investments? If we were able to do that, we could do neighborhood scale resilience improvements that would increase the resilient benefit overall that we would get. So multiple buildings could be rehabbed and you know, improved to be resilient to wildfires, to earthquakes, to all of the things that are facing us, and also help stabilize and improve those neighborhoods for the local residents. And there's also some efforts happening here where our partners are looking at how to build affordable housing in ways that reduces the complexity that is so much creating such an expensive and time-consuming process for our partners, that is breaking the backs of really important community-driven development corporations and affordable housing providers, and instead move away from LIHTC and public-funded sources and try to focus on self-financing models. And so that's where there's been a lot of attention at the Homes Guarantee nationally, and locally we've had some motions put forward for that are actually moving forward right now, hopefully. So there's a big question around social housing and what we can do as a region to promote these kinds of models here. And then, you know, another big kind of space that we're starting to we've been starting to talk a lot more about, and this is started really with the connection between the resilient home work we've been doing and the integrating infrastructure investment, and we started transitioning into the energy space, where there's been a lot of coalition work building and strengthening partnerships with the public sector for this, and securing funds for multifamily affordable housing. And so how do we think about workforce jobs connected to that, and how do we focus on the people most in need, people of color, undocumented families, to build a more resilient region and give them sustainable living wages and quality jobs? So what if we could coordinate and pool public resources that could create those pathways to the building trades, so we have the staffing infrastructure, we can incentivize, you know, journeymen and older kind of folks that have been in the industry, that and give them incentives to train and mentor apprentices through bonuses, and help transition them to green economy types of jobs. What about low interest affordable loans with technical assistance for micro entrepreneurs, and investing in commercial kitchens and commissaries to that are accessible to immigrant communities, so they can stay productive and be healthfully, you know, making their way in the new economy and the new food economy? And then can we also invest in community wealth generating capacity building strategies, so we're teaching people to become their own owners of their businesses, work in worker co-ops, and a lot of different strategies there too, but building that capacity in the region for people to take ownership of the wealth in the community and keep it within our neighborhoods. And so a lot of this work is, again, a part of what La Rosa has started. We really have been focusing on the connection between, you know, displacement and green infrastructure investments that were coming here. It's been a labor of love, unfunded collaborative that NRDC and Enterprise and a lot of the partners you see on this page have been investing time and sweat equity into. And we've really, I think, come together because we know that this is an issue and really helped the region. We're certainly not responsible for all of the things that are happening here, but I think we've definitely helped advance the conversation and connect displacement to parks and green infrastructure, which was a really hard sell in the beginning, but now is definitely a reality that everybody's recognizing. And then there's also a lot of groups that are organizing together that we're partnering with. So you can see a few of them here. This is kind of a timeline of what's been happening. So you can kind of see that this has been going on for a lot of years now. Like in 2015, TOD, Equitable TOD was a movement. It was growing. Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was starting to invest in California, which was allowing housing and transit agencies to start working together with public works to build these kinds of projects. It was really hard. The projects weren't very good, but now 5 years later, we're seeing really sophisticated projects coming out. So we know that if there's a dedicated funding source for these types of integrating infrastructure investments, it drives change and it really brings people to start working together in meaningful ways and gets us to the kinds of projects we want to see. And so in 2016, you know, we had rising displacement, which is continuing now. Homelessness, you know, is definitely increasing still. And we're seeing major investments and plans for infrastructure investments with the LA River. La Rosa starts emerging around that and building that connection between displacement and greening infrastructure. And the voters begin passing what we call locally the WAM measures. So it's supporting water infrastructure, housing, homelessness services. Parks is measure A of the WAM, and then measure M is on transit. In 2017, and you know, measure A steering committee started engaging, and La Rosa started collaborating with them. We didn't have funding, so we became best friends with the consultants, and that's how we were able to like get a lot of our advocacy pushes in, and had a lot of backdoor conversations with them, and then had some strategic partners that were in the steering committee. And then Metro, at the same time, our transit agency, started their policy advisory council, and ACT LA was doing the same thing with them. So that's another great coalition working in the area that's been focusing on transit justice and displacement protections in the region. And then at that same time, EFA, the Green Energy Efficiency for All Coalition, DWP, and the mayor start collaborating to improve programming and benefits to multifamily affordable housing residents, owners, and operators. And we share our La Rosa typologies. In 2018, we started DWP is, you know, based on that great work that EFA and others were doing. Repower LA, they commit $100 million for energy efficiency to multifamily affordable housing. Could that be used as part of our acquisition rehab strategy? And La Rosa land use study is released, which you guys will get a link to. And La Rosa begins providing TA for parks and housing projects and to over 300 units in the region. And we start receiving transformative climate community grants from the state, which also helped advance the community control conversation in the region and really getting the county to buy into it. So this is kind of the last couple years. 2019, a lot was happening. I'm not going to go through it all, but you know, there was a lot of like deeper cross-agency and cross-coalition collaboration. Some of the big highlights are land banking conversation really started brewing. EFA, you know, kind of had their paper released, and the building electrification motion. So that really started us thinking more about workforce. There was a lot of regional resilience events starting to push that. The LA County Sustainability Plan came out from a very robust community engagement process that really helped start in getting people thinking more about community and climate change solutions. The The Homes Guarantee motion was introduced. The neighborhood CDC exchange that we have locally that we support at Enterprise decided to expand and focus more on advocacy. The LACLT coalition was formed. So there's a lot of, LA Metro is pursuing this like regional accelerated development pipeline that's looking at investing and aligning public and private investment for housing, for mobility, and including renewable energy. So we've really got a lot of momentum building up. And then COVID-19 hits, and everything changes, like we heard earlier. And so the county in January had just asked the housing and all these different departments, regional planning, public works, and Metro, to coordinate around displacement and identify strategies to support them through it. And then the Healthy LA Coalition was formed, which is an amazing response that the region came together with 330 organizations now organizing and uplifting concrete community-vetted solutions to hardships caused by COVID-19. It's a massive undertaking, and folks, there's like 800 meetings a week for the different subgroups within it. And LA City and La Rosa partnered to submit a proposal for integrating development and social housing model that will hopefully get funded for, that could really drive things. And just recently, the county and that kind of effort that I just mentioned with the multiple agencies coming together has released the county displacement map and strategies to help prioritize areas of highest displacement risk and select those areas to focus on for preservation and new construction of affordable housing with displacement protections built in. And the Measure A displacement avoidance policy that we helped pass and get instituted for the first of its kind in the country ever to happen in a county parcel tax for parks and open space. That displacement avoidance policy is starting to get implemented, and now an RFP will be coming out where the county will actually be paying for technical assistance to projects and cities in the region that to help educate them and help them identify ways that they can reduce displacement pressures with their projects. So there's a lot of barriers and opportunities to this work listed here. I'm not going to go through them all because I think you can see them and we know what they are. But there's also a lot of roles that Spark can play, like advancing those integrated infrastructure project pipelines, bridging local advocacy efforts with the capital strategies. We really need that in communities, and supporting these types of peer learning and exchanges and national media efforts to drive a national conversation and more holistic thinking. So thank you so much.